We are continuing in our discussion of the Mishna Berurah. We are in Siman Samach Vav 66. We're continuing with interrupting the Shema. We don't want to interrupt the Shema. Interrupting the Shema is not a fun thing to do, but it does become sometimes a rather necessary and required thing for, for whatever reason. As we said at the beginning of this, it's talking about where, for example, someone came up to you, you weren't looking for them. And we're also going to talk about if you were a Kohen and you got called to your aliyah. And so, as we said over there, the that the minhag was to go ahead and interrupt in these different places. Okay. So we're going to say now these are the places where you could take a break. Okay, so that's where we are in 66.5. So if you're following along, we're going to talk about the Bein HaParakim that we were talking about, the places that are in between that you are allowed to interrupt for responding. For example, responding to the Menihei Shmi Rabba, responding to Kaddish, Kedusha, responding to Modim. All these places responding Amen to a bracha. So these are the places. So the first place you're allowed to interrupt is between the first bracha and the second bracha. Okay, so the first bracha is Yotzer Or. So what that means is that you have finished. So you're not allowed to take a break between the Kaddish. We said this previously. Between the Kaddish and Baruch Hu and the beginning of Yotzer Or Borei Choshech, but at the end of the bracha, and between the second bracha of Ahava Rabbah, if it's Shachris for Ashkenazim, or Ahavas Olam, if it's Shachalit, for Sfaradim, and that's the first place you were allowed to take a break. Okay, not take a break, but you are allowed to consider it a break, and allowed to respond to certain sections. And then the next one is between the second blessing and the Shema. Come back to that in a second. We get into the Shulchan Aruch saying that, and then you can take there's another Bein HaParakim between the first paragraph of Shema ending and the beginning of the second paragraph, which starts with the words V'hayat Shemoah, and then at the end of that paragraph and Vayomar Hashem Moshe Lemor Daber Ben Sova Ta'alem V'Sulam Tzitzis, right? That third paragraph, fine. But at the end of that paragraph, and we say Hashem Elokeichem Emes Yatziv, no breaks. Cannot take a break between Hashem Elokeichem Emes. That's not cool. We don't do that. We don't do that. Okay? We shouldn't make a break between Hashem and Emes. He doesn't say it's not cool. He says we don't do that. You should say Ani Hashem Elokeichem Emes, and then you could take a break as if you're in the middle of the section for between the words Emes v'Yatziv. Okay? So that's how you would treat that. So these rules of Bein HaParakim, the Mishna Berurah adds, is for both Shachris and Arvis, for the morning and the afternoon. Okay, and you can't take a break in between Emes v'Yatziv because there's no reason for you to break those two up because the what's it called? The Talmud requires it. And we say not to rest out even with a little pause of any kind. And so we say that Elokeichem Emes needs to be put together. So Mishna Berurah says that it sounds like from Shulchan Aruch that you just say those two words and that's sufficient. Now some people say that now when you go to the word V'Yatziv, you can take a break. That's what it sounds like. So Mishna Berurah says no, that the word V'Yatziv is also included in that. Okay, so when you're in that third blessing, then you shouldn't put a break between that at all. Okay, so some people say you should say Yatziv first. Some people don't. So the Mishna Berurah says that you should say V'Yatziv first, and then you can make a break in the middle. So for example, if someone came up to you and said to you, "How are you?" You should say Hashem Elokeichem Emes V'Yatziv, Baruch Hashem I am well, and then continue. continue on with that. So that is if a very honored or distinguished person came to you and interrupted you, for example. Okay. Well, we should try not to interrupt for anybody else. Now, you did that. Okay, now you did the Shulchan Aruch says in Halakha 6. You went ahead and you were worried about the person who's talking to you, right? Police officer, shows up in shul, right? Very irate and need to talk to somebody immediately. Okay, so if you stopped in the middle of reciting the Shema because of the fear or because of the honored person, okay? And you've already said MS, okay? Or, right, you said Hashem Elokeichem MS, okay? Or the person himself has finished the Shema before the Chazan had said Hashem Elokeichem and MS together, and you're sitting quietly. So you finished, but they haven't finished. Okay, so if you make a break, then the strawberry waves you. Waving is different. I mean, you're not supposed to do that. We were talking about that a couple of frakim ago. But this is when they come into you and they say they are expecting you to respond. There's an expectation of response. A wave is not as big a deal. It's an expectation that they respond to you. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to do that. But if that were the case, here we're talking about you actually said something between MS Viatzi. So in this case, you finished it, but the Chazan did not. You're waiting for him, so you can say everything else together. So the Shulchan Aruch says you do not need to go and repeat Hashem Elokeichem MS together. Okay, so you're waiting. So they want to. You were waiting for him to say it, but you've said it yourself. You don't have to go back and say it. Okay. Now, the Mishna Berurah explains that if you were sitting there silently and you will recite it with them, okay, you don't have to go back and recite it again. Now, you don't need to recite it a second time, but if you are, taking a little pause in the blessings of Kriya Shema, and that you're waiting for the Chazan, you don't have to go back and repeat it again. And as we said before, you only go back to the word that you missed. Okay, just like the law said earlier. Okay, we're in Halacha Zion now. Okay, so we talked about that what was considered Bein HaParakim. So this next is not considered Bein HaParakim. When you finish the blessing of Gal Yisrael, not only should you not take a break between that and the beginning of Shmona Esrei. This is the third blessing in the morning, right before the Amidah, before the Shmona Esrei. So the Shulchan Aruch says one should not respond Amen with Gal Yisrael because that's a break between Gal Yisrael and Hashem Tzvasai Tiftach at the beginning of Shmona Esrei. Okay, so it doesn't matter whose bracha it is, whether it's the guy next to you or it's the Chazan. Okay. Now the Ramah says you do say it, and that's our minhag. It's to say Amen after you hear the shot say Gal Yisrael. But if you're praying by yourself, you shouldn't say Amen after that. Okay, which seems to imply that you're saying it after your own blessing. So what does that mean? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. There's some interesting Ashkenazi customs here in this case. And this isn't even the final halacha, as we'll see later on. This isn't what the Ramah himself says to actually do. Okay, so we don't say, the Mishna Berurah says after Gal Yisrael, you don't say Amen, and it's written in past tense. And he's not called Goel Yisrael, he's Gal, the one who has redeemed, who did redeem Israel. And it's referring to the one who, meaning Hashem, who redeemed us from Egypt. Now, in Shemona Esrei, Hashem is referred to as Goel Yisrael because the idea is that He continuously redeems us. Okay, and that's those about future redemptions. And same thing too. the idea is that we say the same thing in the Arvit prayer, in the Ma'ariv prayer as well. So therefore, we say therefore the blessings for the morning and the evening, we say Gal Yisrael both times. There is an opinion that seems to want to have a different nusach for that, but we don't have that. We don't have that tradition. For Ashkenazim, at least, it should be the same both in the morning and the evening. I'm not off the top of my head. I can't remember if Sfardim have a different one for both the morning and the evening in the third blessing. And in the evenings also there's a fourth one. But let's stay focused on simply saying Amen after Gal Yisrael for Shachars. So the Ramah says that's our minhag, is to say Amen after the Gal Yisrael of Shachars. Why? Because this opinion over here says that you should say Amen even after you have finished your own blessing. Okay, and because you have finished the entire section of blessings of the Shema of the morning, so that's considered something that you should definitely answer Amen to say that it is true and it is certain. And that's not considered a break because it's a response that is pertinent to the Shema. And therefore, the Ramah adds this statement that our custom is to do that. And that's why he says that there is no minhag to do that when you're praying by yourself. Now, that is assuming you haven't said Hashem Tzufasai Tiftach. Okay, because after that, that's considered Shemona Esrei. That's according to the Ramah. The custom that is most common, and the Mishna Berurah refers to them as people who try to be a little more stringent on themselves, is to satisfy every opinion. So what they do is they get to the end of the blessing, and they wait to Tzur Yisrael Kuma Be'ezras Yisrael at the end of it. Okay. And some people try to say Amen in the middle of the blessing. That's not good because now you are responding Amen in the middle of a section. That's also not good. Okay. So, and he says instead is that we saw earlier in Samach Gimel that the Ramah says that you should recite the whole thing together at the same time. So what that means you should do is you should finish your blessing at the same time that the Shliach Tzibur says his blessing, and then you aren't obligated to say Amen to that. Okay, or finish even hop and a skip ahead of the Shliach Tzibur and start to say Hashem Tzufasai Tiftach before the Shliach Tzibur gets to the end of the blessing. And that way you make everybody happy. And so that also means that, in case you're wondering, yes, you can actually start Shemona Esrei, a hop and a skip ahead of everybody else. But a hop, a skip, and a jump, they really shouldn't daven Shemona Esrei before everybody else. Okay, moving on to Halacha 8 over here. So the rule is, the reason why we're getting kind of snippy about the Amen is because you need to what's called Lismoch Gula Tefillah. And we haven't talked much about this yet. So there's a concept in the Talmud that in the structure of the Shacharis and Arvis prayer service, there's a concept that the Torah wanted us to keep the mention of the Exodus from Egypt immediately next to all of our prayers for ourselves. It's called Samach Gula Tefillah, and it's part of the requirements of the prayer service. So the Shulchan Aruch here says you must do this. It's a rule of the Talmud. One should not pause after say Gal Yisrael, okay, unless there's some type of okay. Apologize for the technical difficulties. Hopefully this won't be an issue anymore. Okay, let's start this statement over again. We must put the end of the third blessing of Shema right before the Shemona Esrei, and you shouldn't take a break. Okay, unless there's some type of compelling circumstance, like your tefillin showed up right now, between those places. You should put them on, but don't say the blessing on them. After Shemona Esrei, you say the blessing on them. But if you haven't put on a talis yet, you haven't put on tzitzis, you shouldn't do that. Okay. If you're in the middle of the blessing though, and you haven't said the words Ga'al Yisrael, and then you get your talis and tefillin delivered to you, you put them on. Don't say a blessing on them until after Shemona Esrei. The Ramah adds, some people say that before you say the words Ga'al Yisrael, you can say the blessing on tefillin, and such is our custom. Okay, so again, this goes back to a similar dispute about what's considered appropriate to do b'emsa tefillah. Okay, so the real discussion Mishna Berurah points out about putting the redemption from Egypt and future redemptions in our personal prayers is discussed later on in 111. Okay, and you should not pause, even take a little break, as we said earlier, and you should say Ga'al Yisrael. And the Mishna Berurah points out this is actually much more strict than taking a pause in between any other spot in the tefillah, because even here you shouldn't respond. Okay, you shouldn't respond unless there is a concern that your life is in danger. Okay. So let's say you haven't put tefillin on. So he's already said the Shema. Okay, so what happens is the reason why it happened like this, the Mishna Berurah explains, is because it was really late in the morning, and he weren't able to wait on the Kriya Shema for tefillin, because the time for Kriya Shema was going to pass, and he wanted to say Kriya Shema right before Yudav Shemona Esrei. And same thing, if you've missed the time for Kriya Shema, it's really late in the morning now, and you're at shul to catch the later minyan, you should pray without tefillin, and then when you get them, then you can go ahead and put them on. Okay, or you can put on the tefillin when you say the Mincha Shemona Esrei. Okay, so the Mishna Berurah talks about a possible interesting case over here. If you don't have tefillin at the time when the congregation is davening, so the question is it better to daven with the tzibur without tefillin, and probably without talis as well, and then when those things come to you, put them on? Or is it better to wait until after you have to wait on the tefillah b'tzibur in order to borrow tefillin from somebody else, in order that you should recite the Shema and Shemona Esrei while wearing tefillin? So he brings one opinion that says that someone should actually push off tefillah b'tzibur, that you should wait and then borrow tefillin afterwards and say that. Now, is he the only one that says that? No, he's not. So there's other opinions over here as well. The opinion of I left the footnote over here, and that was not to the right place. 1 second, I think I made a note and it wasn't to the right thing. So, okay, so if this happens, so we just said the first opinion was that you should wait later. Okay, and other people bring down bring that down as well. So the Kaf HaChaim says it as well, and there's a difference of opinion about it. So if we wanted to go into greater detail, we would see that there's a dispute about it. But the majority opinion seems to be that you should wait. So there are people who disagree, and it's the consensus seems to be that that's the way to do it. Now, one last statement over here before we go on to the next halacha. So the Mishna Berurah says, Mishna Berurah says about you should have tefillin on because you should wear tefillin while you're reciting about tefillin. Okay. So there's a number of achronim who disagree with the opinion to not make the bracha, and they side with the Ramah. Some people even say that it's permitted to recite the blessing for tefillin even between Ga'al Yisrael and the Shemona Esrei, as long as you haven't said Hashem Tzfasai Tiftach. But many people disagree with that, so we should follow the majority opinion in these places. Okay. And let's see. So there's other one more question over here. Let's see. All right. So the Ramah brings down that you should say it before Gal Yisrael. Okay. So you're pausing. You're standing quietly. And so the statement is the following. Okay, that you should say that you should. It's prohibited to say the blessing at this point. Okay, you also can't say Baruch Shem and other things on tefillin. Okay, if you're making two blessings like what you would see in the laws of tefillin, and some people even say that you should only say one blessing to put the tefillin on at this time. Okay, so that's the opinion of the Ramah. And so the final opinion is to do this, to say one blessing and put on the tefillin before Shemona Esrei with one blessing, even if you normally say two. Halacha Tes, number 9 over here. So this one's pretty straightforward. One should not respond to Kaddish and Kedusha between the Geula at Latfila, between the Gal Yisrael and Hashem Tzvasat Tiftach. Let me get to your question here in a second. So if you should not respond to Kaddish or Kedusha at the spot. So what you should do is you should wait at the words Shira Chadasha towards the end of the blessing, and that's when you can respond. Okay, so if you know that if you're following behind or you're behind the rest of the congregation, then you could go ahead and respond at that time. Let me look at the question over here. Okay. If someone was waiting for a pair of tefillin and had not yet recited Shacharis, and then come back. Trying to read it. Took it away from me. And then on Rosh Chodesh, the congregation moves to Hallel and Musaf. Would he join in with that out of order? Oh, good question. Okay. So if you're waiting for tefillin and you hadn't done Shacharis, but the congregation is at Hallel, so yeah, you could recite Hallel with the congregation. You don't need tefillin for that, and you could even technically recite Musaf, but we don't do that as we said earlier. We should recite. We learned last week that you should say the Shacharis first and then Musaf later. But yeah, you should recite Hallel first with them. That law is actually discussed later on. Over here, the Mishna Berurah adds that there's a dispute between the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch over here about not responding to Kaddish. That on Shabbos there's less of a requirement for Smichas Kula Tefillah, and he says it's permitted to respond, but we don't follow that opinion. We'll discuss it later in Siman Kuf Yud Aleph in chapter 111. Okay, so if you haven't heard, so the Mishna Berurah says if you haven't yet heard or responded to Kedusha and Baruch Hu, and you're in the middle of these blessings, so you should wait at the words Shira Chadasha. Okay, so you say the words Osef Ele, and then that's what you should do. But if you haven't said Baruch Atah Hashem at the end of the blessing, you can still go ahead and respond to Kaddish and Kedusha. And then you go back to the word Shira Chadasha Shibchul Giolim. Okay? Or if you're a little bit further along, you can start with the next sentence, which is Sur Yisrael. Okay, the next halacha here is the last halacha for today. So if you haven't said the words Emes V'Yatziv as Shacharis or Emes V'Emunah in the evening, this is an exact quote from the Shulchan Aruch. You have not fulfilled the mitzvah as enacted. And the Ramah says someone who was an ones, he was compelled, okay, and forced, and he has whatever happened. He has some type of something was going on where it was just for whatever reason it was considered unavoidable. You were stuck, right? You were traveling, you were trying to get in between planes. They trap you in the plane, right? You're stuck in an Uber. You are trapped in your boat, okay, and you don't have time to pray, okay. So after you recite the Shema, you should recite all the blessings and say MS, and then you should wait to say the rest of the bracha until you're ready or free to pray, because then you can say the words Yatziv v'Nachon, and then you can go ahead and get Smicha Skula Tefillah. So again, okay, you don't have the time to pray Shema Esrei immediately, okay, but you did get to say Shema, because that time was going to pass, but you're stuck. So say the Shema with the blessings until MS, and then say the word MS, and then wait to V'Yatziv until you're ready to say Shema Esrei. Okay, and so then you pick up. Now, so the Shulchan Aruch says that you should, not he's saying that the proper way to do is to say MS V'Yatziv together, but you still fulfilled your obligation of Kriya Shema, because you learned already that the blessings don't stop you from fulfilling the obligation. Okay, so you should go back and say it correctly, like we said earlier, that someone interrupted you and you interrupted yourself, that you should go back and recite the words again. Okay, but he says that some people hold that you should go back and recite the entire Shema again. And also we need to make sure that when you're reciting the blessings, that there's certain requirements for the blessing that should be in there. And so it's interesting. I'm not going to go into all of the details over here, but there was a little bit of dispute in the Middle Ages about what exactly was the content necessary in these blessings. So it's something interesting to look at more in depth in the Shulchan, in the Mishna Berurah, which we won't get to right now. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Ramah real quick. So if you don't have time, so the Mishna Berurah says, what do you mean you don't have time? What does that mean to not have time? I don't understand it. Who allowed you to stop? Okay. So what you should do is not say the blessings of Kriya Shema, say Kriya Shema by itself. So he doesn't understand why the Ramah would have allowed the situation at all. Okay? Because we already said it in Siman Samach Beis, that was the appropriate thing to do. And so some people say that for whatever reason this was a common thing to have happen, and that this ruling was correct. So, or you thought you had time, and so if you think you're not going to have time, then this opinion of the Ramah would be fine. But really, you shouldn't start like that. Okay, you should really say Kriya Shema all by itself. Okay, so we have finished 66. We will pick up next time with 67 and 68. 67 is only one sif. So as a 68, we'll see how we do with time for next time. I don't want to not get through a lot of stuff. It just happens to be 68 is quite long. So we probably do quite a few simanim together, because they are, like I said, they're short and they'll stick together. I'll make a cheshbon to see how we can get all in our regularly scheduled class. But we will pick up next time with about what to do if you're not sure if you recited the Shema. So everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.